Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with charred red cabbage and carrot salad. That's right, charred cabbage is having a moment. Or so I heard from a friend recently. And I started laughing. And he's like, bro, I'm serious. And I'm like, really? And also, don't call me bro. But anyway, it does make sense, since it's one of the most delicious things you can eat. And I'm going to show you what I think is by far the best way to do it. And to get started, we will take a knife. And we will halve, core, and then cut up some red cabbage, which is very simple, especially if you have some nice small tight heads like this. Right, once it's halved and you can see the core, we will just make 2 angled cuts at the bottom, and we'll remove that piece and toss it in the compost. And by the way, I would have called this purple cabbage, but I was not consulted, and they went with red. And then once the core's been removed, we can lay it down on the flat side, and we'll cut that into about 1-inch pieces. And since these heads were very small, that's all I'm going to have to do. Okay, if you're using a larger head, you might want to quarter it before you slice, so these strips aren't too long, and it's a little more fork friendly. Okay, please always be friendly to your forks. So I'm going to go ahead and cut up 2 small heads like that, since we're going to want about 2 1/4, 2.5 pounds total. Oh, and if we were doing some kind of raw slaw with this, we could go ahead and trim out some of those tougher, larger ribs. But with this charring technique, we don't have to, since those are actually going to end up nice and tender. And then while we're slicing, we'll also take a half a red onion, or any color onion, and we will slice that fairly thickly. And as far as the carrots go, we're actually not going to cut those. We're going to use a peeler later. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and grease a foil-lined sheet pan with a couple teaspoons of vegetable oil. And once that's been accomplished, we'll go ahead and transfer on our cabbage, arranging that cut side up, if at all possible. And the reason I'm calling for about 2.5 pounds of cabbage is because that should just about perfectly fit one standard size sheet pan. And once we have that arranged as shown, we will drizzle over a little more oil. All right, not a ton, just like a couple tablespoons. And after we've done that, we can take this and head to the oven, but we're not going to roast and we're not going to bake. We are actually going to broil, which is that heating element at the top of the oven that hardly anybody uses. And we will broil that on high for about 5 minutes or so, or until we have some nice initial charring, and our cabbage hopefully looks like this. And once we've gotten some nice charring on that side, we will use a spatula, and also maybe some tongs, and we'll try to flip this over to the other, uncharred side, at which point we'll repeat the exact same process. But please be careful, because by now your broiler is very hot, so the second side is probably not going to take as long to char. So check it after a couple minutes. And also, broilers have some spots that are hotter than others, so don't be afraid to turn the pan and move it around if you have to. And when we say char, we mean the edges are getting a little bit black. All right, we don't mean we're burning the entire piece, although some of the small pieces might, and that's okay. But the point is, we're just going for a very superficial char. But anyway, after charring both sides of the cabbage, we will go ahead and scatter our onions over the top. And once we have those fairly evenly distributed, we can start peeling our carrots over the top, using nice long firm strokes, since we want to try to get the longest, thickest pieces we can. All right, the first few might be a little bit skinny, but as we peel down, they will get wider and thicker. And I'm calling for 2 carrots here, but we're not going to use all the carrot, since once we peel to a certain point, it's going to be too hard to get a nice thick piece. And once that happens, we will switch to the other carrot and peel as much as that as we can. And once our surface has been successfully carroted, we'll go ahead and do a little bit of arranging, just so everything's getting about the same amount of heat. And that's it, we'll pop that back under the broiler. Oh, and I'm going to stop filming going in and out of the oven, since I think you got the idea. But anyway, we'll broil those for about 3 minutes, or until our carrots and onions start to soften up, and hopefully look like this. And that's it, at this point we can finally season this up, which I'm going to do with a generous amount of kosher salt, since undersalted vegetables don't taste good. And then we'll also sprinkle over some garam masala, which is an amazing Indian spice blend. But if you don't have that, you can also use any kind of prepared curry powder. And then we'll finish up with a few shakes of cayenne, since that's never a bad idea. At which point we'll take our tongs and give this a very thorough tossing. And once we've done that, and we feel like everything's been nicely mixed, I think we should take our spatula and sort of push everything from the sides a little bit towards the middle. Okay, now that our veggies have softened up and are less rigid, they're taking up less space. And by gathering those closer to the middle, we'll have everything closer to the hottest part of the broiler, which is almost always the center. And that's it. We'll take that back to the broiler for one last charring. Or at least this was my last charring. And no, that is not burnt. That is charred. And I would say perfectly charred. But we're not just charring. We have to cook that cabbage until it's tender enough to eat. So make sure you take a taste or two. And mine was perfect. But if yours isn't, give it a toss and put it back in. Or you're the one that's going to have to determine how far to go. I mean, you are, after all, the babish of your charred red cabbage. But like I said, I determined mine was perfect. And once that is, we will transfer it into a bowl. And we will finish this up with a very simple dressing. Starting with a little drizzle of honey. Since we really do want some sweetness here to balance the bitterness and the savoriness. Oh, and it's very hard to remove honey from a dressing. So start with a little, and if you want to add more later, you can. All right, that is just you cooking. And then we'll also want to add in about 3 or 4 tablespoons of vinegar. And I like to use a rice vinegar because it's fairly neutral and has a little bit of sweetness to it. But anything you like will work. And once we add the vinegar, we'll give this another thorough tossing, at which point we'll grab a fork and give it a taste and evaluate. And mostly I'm checking for salt, and it almost always needs another pinch. So once I was able to finally stab a piece and taste it, I went ahead and tossed them in. And then once it's seasoned perfectly, we'll finish up with the last 2 ingredients. A little bit of olive oil, or the oil of your choice, plus a small handful of freshly sliced green onions. And that's it. We'll take a spoon and give that one last mix. At which point we can transfer that into something nice looking to serve it in. And yes, since I do have to take some contractually obligated pictures, I did spend a few minutes arranging things on the top so it would look nice. And by a few minutes, I mean like 15. But eventually I stopped and finished up with a few more green onions. And that's it. My charred red cabbage and carrot salad was ready to enjoy. So I grabbed a fork and dug in. And that, my friends, besides looking absolutely gorgeous, is one of the best tasting things you'll ever put in your mouth. Right, not just the best tasting cabbage or best tasting vegetables, like one of the best tasting things, period. And if you've never enjoyed something like this before, you're probably thinking it has to taste burnt and bitter and unpleasant. But it doesn't, not even close. All right, yes, there's definitely a little bit of bitterness from the charring, but it's that bitter flavor profile that amplifies all the sweet and savory tastes. And unless you make this and enjoy it yourself, me trying to describe it is just not going to do it justice. And yes, this would obviously make a stunning side dish for any special occasion dinner. But besides the obvious side dish use, this is so savory and so satisfying. Just a bowl of this, with maybe a poached egg and a piece of buttered bread, I think would pretty much make a perfect meal. So I plan on doing both. And I serve some here with some beautiful roasted lamb. And I think I need sharper forks. I seem to be having a problem lately. Come on, Chef John, you can do it. Oh yeah, there we go. But no matter how you enjoy this, it truly is an incredible thing to eat. And I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.